All right, I think we're live. Good afternoon, everyone. Maybe good morning for some or good evening. Welcome to today's webinar, which is all about competency-based hiring. I think, well, Tony, we're going to touch upon it in a second, but I think it's really a buzzword. Every enterprise, every company is talking about it. I think that there's for a lot of those companies, it's still quite of a mystery how to get there. So hopefully we're going to bring some value to the table today. Before, Tony, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, maybe to quickly introduce myself as well. My name is Charlotte. I am one of the founders of Equalture. We are a recruitment tech company based in the Netherlands, in Rotterdam. Long story short, we develop game-based assessments that are being introduced at the very start of the funnel to ensure that you get a more objective first impression of a candidate, which I think very well ties into the topic of how to look more at competencies and maybe a bit less at previous experience and those kinds of things. But enough about Equalture, because that's not what today's webinar is about. Before, Tony, I'm going to hand it over to you. Practical note for everyone who's listening. I'm not the best multitasker, but I'm going to try to take a look at all the questions that come in meanwhile, so that Tony can also answer them for you. In the lower right corner of your screen, you see a tab called Chat and a tab called Questions. If you have any questions or comments to share, feel free to do it in either the Chat tab or the Questions tab. I will look at both. And a warm welcome again. And then, Tony, I would like to ask you to briefly introduce yourself.
Yeah, good. We get a good international audience. I see already. You're coming from the Netherlands. I see Philippe in the chat from Slovenia. I'm coming to you from Italy, Tuscany. I moved a month ago.
So it's pretty there, right?
Yes. Yeah, the good thing is we're at 580 meters height, so I'm just doing it with 31, 33 degrees. So cold, no, but not the booming heat. Florence, it's like 37, 38 degrees. That's a little bit more tough. But yeah, so I'm Tony de Graaf. Yes, my last name is very Dutch. I am Dutch, but as said, I live in Italy. I work for SmartRecruiters as the global director of our strategy consulting practice. And what I do is I work with TA teams around the world to help them improve their TA practices in the broadest sense of the word. That's building a strategy, to helping them build talent communities, to help them set up the reporting and analytics, hiring team training, and anything in between. And a little bit about my background. This is actually my first non-recruiting job in my life. I always a recruiter, right? Everyone in this industry, at least a lot of people are like, yeah, when you go to school, when you study, when I grow up, I want to be a recruiter. So I had exactly the same. Of course not. I ended up in it. Agency side, did a ton of agency jobs, went to the corporate side, headed up recruitment for multiple fashion brands in Europe and for one of the largest e-commerce companies in the Netherlands. I think we have a big Dutch audience anyway. So I worked for Wekamp as head of talent. And now it's SmartRecruiters. And that's it.
Cool. Thanks. Hey, and today we're going to talk about competency-based hiring. What is it? Why is it becoming such an important topic now? I think literally every website that I open about HR trends and recruitment trends is now about competency-based hiring, skill-based hiring. I think it's both the same. And how can you also start implementing it? Because I think it's an issue. Well, Tony, we of course spoke with each other before starting this webinar again. But what I generally see from most of our customers is that there's a huge willingness to shift more from experience-based hiring to competency-based hiring, but that they just have no clue where to start. So hopefully we can make that a little bit more tangible. Before we dive into why it's relevant right now and how to do it, how would you describe competency-based hiring?
Yeah, that's exactly. I think that's directly a good question, because I think it's not always so clear. So I think it's a really good question to start. For me, it's hiring employees based on transferable skills or the candidate's or person's ability to develop them in the workplace. And I think the fundamental difference is there that we do not specifically skills and competency-based hiring. So that is what we will need to do. But what we are doing today, so what we shouldn't do, is more experienced and achievement-based hiring. I think if we have to give it a name, I think that is the best way to describe it. So what have you done before, and why were you super successful? And okay, you're hired, right? So I think that is for me the big split. That doesn't matter technically if you solely look at competencies and skills-based hiring. So the transferable skills that somebody has, so it can also be cross-functional and cross-job, right? Project management skills are used in a lot of type of jobs, and or the ability to learn them in the workplace. So it's a combination of those. So not just can somebody do the job today, or do we at least see a fast ramping path because the person needs some support and some training to actually learn the specifics of this job? That's how I would describe it.
Yeah, and maybe for people who are listening, for which the term transferable skills is new, think about skills that help you grow faster in your role now, but also in a new role, and that indeed are for multiple roles. So project management, I think, is a good example. Problem solving ability, learning ability, all those kinds of more soft skills, I'd say.
Yeah, and I think you had a good point there as well to elaborate on that a little bit more, right? So, for example, email marketing, right? If you're looking for a junior email marketer, but somebody has been a sourcer / community manager as recruiter, managing a CRM, a talent pool of people, and setting up email campaigns to actually connect and reach out to them, then you're technically a recruiter working in HR. But that is, in my eyes, the definition of a transferable skill. If you then would say, well, I'm actually interested to learn more performance marketing on the e-commerce side, because the basic principles, how to think about a talent pool and how to engage with them, that's transferable. You need to learn the specifics, of course, but that could be very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, what is for you the difference then between competencies and skills? Do you think there's a difference? Because those terms are sometimes used in the same way. For some people, it's different.
The funny thing is, I had for myself always a strict definition difference. But to be very honest, working around the world in a lot of different cultures and languages, I now am not so strict on myself with, okay, no, this one is fundamentally different than the other one. In some countries and languages it is, but for me it's more around the things, the tools that are in somebody's toolbox that can make that person successful or capable to actually do the role. So that's more how I started to describe that, because not in every language there is this split, hard split. There are different types of skills and competencies, right? So some are literally more practical and actually in the execution. So, for example, Excel skills, or the skills that you actually have to actually work with pieces of technology, all the way to the more intercommunication skills, project management skills, communication skills, and all these kind of things, right? So I more see the split in that, right? So intercommunicational.
Would you say more hard skills, soft skills then also, or?
Yes, but I don't like the word soft skills, because that implies that they're less good and less important. And for me, it's actually the other way around. I would rather hire someone that only hits 80% of the checklist on the hard skills, but in soft skills knocks it out of the park. Because hard skills is, of course, if I see that you have a good opportunity to learn these skills and this program and the technology that you need, I would rather hire that person than the other way around. A super guru in Excel, but he's an horrible to work with, and it is not a great communicator, right? That is less easy to make a fit and successful than the other way around. So I do agree with you, but I don't like to call it specifically hard and soft skills.
Yeah, no, I know, I fully get you, and I think that I have to use those terms now, because I should have come up with a new term prior to this webinar. But I think that the whole concept of hiring for hard skills will also get more and more difficult, because we constantly get new jobs. So I think it will be, well, for me personally, but I am very biased, of course, because of the company that I have. But I'd rather hire someone with a very high learning ability and maybe a lower level in a specific hard skill than someone who can actually master that specific hard skill but has a very low learning ability to transfer to another hard skill. Might have stolen your answer to my next question a little bit by saying that, but why do you think that? Because I think that, well, for most recruiters, it's not a new concept, competency-based hiring, and having that discussions about hiring for skills rather than experiences. But why do you think that this topic has exploded the way it has been in the I'd say the last year, but especially in the last 6 months, like every platform is writing about it and trying to educate people on it. Why do you think that shift is happening so fast now?
An interesting answer to that. I would say ChatGTP. You're like, what? Well, the resume is dead. It has been for a long time. Everyone in recruitment knows this. The best examples is to give, what are you actually looking for in the resume when you hire bus drivers, truck drivers, retail personnel, logistics people, right? People work in the supermarket. We know, like, if you want to become a bus driver after you've been a mother of 5 children for 20 years, then you don't have work history because you chose to be at home, then you are less good of a bus driver than somebody who's done it already for a while. It has nothing to do. There is no relationship there, right? So we know this is already the case, but we find it harder to actually move away from resume-based hiring, so that experience and achievement hiring, if you will, in white-collar roles, so more the office roles, like that we're all well familiar with. But then ChatGTP came along, and I had this conversation last week at RecFest as well, is that I actually asked the audience a question, or actually made a bold statement. A candidate is cheating if they use ChatGTP on their application. A whooping 1/3 of the room of recruiters said yes. I say no. It's and somebody said, yeah, but then they cheat, and how do you know they tell the truth? I said, yeah, but even before ChatGTP, how do you know that somebody doesn't lie on their resume or about their achievements, right? It's a non-issue, right? So the problems already exist, but now we see that piece that we actually held onto, that experience, that resume, how it is written, and the motivational letters. And now there can be absolutely no relationship between the resume and the motivational letter and what that person did. You literally go to ChatGTP, you say, write me a strong motivational letter based on my resume and based on this job description. You press enter, you're blown away. I've tried it. It's flipping epic. So I think it's coming more into an accelerator, that the value of those things that we still try to hold on to, like resumes and motivational letters, we kind of like, is this true? It's perfectly written towards our job, right? So I think these conversations are not new. Moving to skills and competency-based hiring is another piece of gut feeling that I'm sure that everyone is in this webinar did not just start to think about in the last year, right? We already knew this 5, 7, 8, maybe even 10 years ago. They were like, wouldn't it be amazing if we could really hire based on skills and competencies? But the technology was not even close that we could do that. But I think we're now at that influx point of that technology can actually help us build incredible processes like what you guys are doing as well, right? And that now, on the other hand, that those pieces that we hold on to for the old school way of hiring are now also being questioned. What is true about a resume? You can have every job that you apply to say, optimize my resume for this job description. You paste your resume in, and you just click enter. There's no complexity there. You just literally ask that question, and the resume is written in a perfect way and says the right keywords and has the right things to pop out just for that job. So I think that's the reason.
Yeah, I agree. And it's something that I experience as well with our customers. I'm curious about your opinion. I think that for recruiters, of course, it's their field of expertise. I indeed also hope that most recruiters in this call already think about competency-based hiring for many, many years. I think the biggest challenge is not necessarily there. I think it's also the hiring managers who want to just cling to something that they always did and still believe that the resume or a motivation letter is a very good way to assess whether someone is a good fit. How do you, because I assume that at SmartRecruiters, this is also an important topic of conversation also with your customers. How do you guide your customers in getting the hiring manager on board with this concept? Because at the end of the day, it's always the hiring manager who makes the final decision. So if they're not on board with this concept, you might as well not even start implementing it.
Yeah, I think you hit on a really good point there. And I think what I want to say before answering that question, because yes, this is a lot of the work we do with our customers. I think it's something that we need to realize, that if we want to switch something so fundamental in our industry, so moving away from hiring on resumes to skills and competency-based hiring, it is one of the larger and complexer projects we can do. And it by definition requires cross-functional work. And the core things that we actually need to do that are not within the ownership or responsibility of the TA function. Because if we look at who actually owns the job descriptions and the skills and competency base, the salary house that should be connected to that, the performance management thing that should be connected to that, the L&D thing that should be connected to that, it's all HR, isn't it? Right? So the core is owned by HR, or in a little bit more advanced organizations, it should fall on the head of talent, but that on a side note. And then we also, even if you can find your collaboration with your HR business partners or that HR team, like, okay, we're going to build this entire new function house based on skills and competencies and job profiles and personas and whatnot, all that beautiful stuff. And then you build a good hiring process, like we write our job descriptions well. We have some gamification to qualify how people actually are scoring and all these beautiful things. And then we hand the resume to the hiring manager. He says, yeah, I've been hiring for 20 years. I know what I'm talking about. And they do exactly the same thing as the last 20 years. And the entire flipping house, of course, falls apart, right? So if you want to successfully implement competency and skills-based hiring, you need to own that entire process from end to end, right? You need to, right? And it's also fine, because that may sound then, oh yeah, but then it's never possible in my organization. It is okay to start first collaborating with HR, right? You don't need to build Rome in one flipping day, right? It's fine. If you can already have a list of skills and competencies for the roles, that's already amazing in whatever way, shape, or form you do that. Like through your tools or literally, because some organizations just do hire a consultancy agency and do a big project. I don't care how you do it, but you can make that first step. Then you as TA in your ownership, you can change the way that you actually write your job ad. You can change the way that you do your first selection and come to the shortlist for the hiring manager, for example, right? You can do all that in your circle of influence. And then you can also work with your hiring managers, hopefully all at the same time, but that's not realistic, right? You need to train and with your hiring managers, obviously that's hiring manager training. You need to talk to them. They need to be part of that process of selecting the actual skills and competencies that they need in their role. Right, so the job intake meeting is not, we have a job, thank you. The job intake meeting is, hey, you have 5 people on your team. We now have an empty chair. What are the skills and competencies that you just walked out with because you left that organization that we really need to replace? And the second question, now that we have the opportunity of an empty chair, what are the skills and competencies that we would like to add to this team, to your team, now that we have the opportunity? Right, so that is a recruiter conversation with the hiring manager. And literally, if you just ask these 2 questions, this is already where the biggest change happens. And you haven't even done hiring manager training. You haven't even told them to do their job differently. You haven't, right? So it's literally you as recruiter showing up different in that first conversation with your hiring manager, and try to move the conversation based around skills and competencies. You won't do it perfectly the first time. Not every hiring manager will go with you, but that's where it starts. That is the closest to our circle of influence as recruitment in driving this change. Because obviously, HR and leadership need to send this message down as well and say, follow recruitment and do this and etc. Right? You need to have this rounded attack on all sides to get them fully on board and really change. But literally, you showing up, not accepting a job when it comes in, just directly post it. Always have this conversation. And it doesn't even need to be fully on skills and competencies, but literally the question, what was this person doing in your team, but that was so important that we really need to replace? And or what are you actually missing in your team? You don't even mention skills and competencies, but you're kind of having a conversation about skills and competencies, right? So start small. That's where I would start, and this is a lot of the work that we do with our customers as well, because this is something we can control as TA. And the last thing I want to add, in my previous role at Baycomp, moving to, we called it the scorecard project, because that was where we had some the skills and competencies that matched to that specific functional role that we were hiring for. It took us 2.5 years to get maybe 60, maybe 70% of the organizations to follow 60 or 70% of the organization to follow this, right?
Yeah.
So Rome is not built in one day. Please do not try to implement this and think you're going to do this bam for your entire organization at once. There's always, for us, it was product. The product department, the VP of product was very interested in this. So we're like, you're our best friend, road of least resistance. Then we're just going to do this with you. And here we're going to start. And here we're going to learn. And IT and technology was very close to product. And we're doing this for a couple of months. And then the CTO was like, what are you doing over there with product? I want what he's having. Like, sure, road of least resistance. Now we're going to roll it out in your department as well. And finance, we never pulled it off. In my time that I worked there, I hope they did it right now, but they were just not open to it. But that's fine, right? Don't get frustrated about that. Focus on what you can do. Showing up to those meetings in the beginning and focus just on the departments that really want to make this change. Very long answer, but I think we needed to go from that direction first.
Oh yeah, I fully agree. And I think it's also what we see with our customers is that I think there's a couple of different levels of complexity in implementing this. So I think it's in general easier for blue collar than white collar, because blue collar by definition is already more of a skills job where you're less worried about what you did before. So then white collar is already more complex, but that's usually where the biggest shift needs to be made in the organizations. And then within white collar, you of course have, well, you mentioned product as an example, but also finance. Well, I think product is a perfect example of a department that is already very much skills focused. I mean, nowadays you have educational programs for product managers, product owners, but you do that through online institutes and definitely not through a university degree. So it's one of those examples, I think, of departments where you already have that advantage of it is a skills job. But for finance, yeah, most companies, of course, want someone with a finance degree if they're going to hire someone for a finance role. So I think that indeed picking your battles where to start and not doing everything at once is maybe the best advice, because I think a lot of companies are making this super big in their heads, and then once we make it big, we all know what happens. It ends up on a big pile.
And exactly. So that's also with I encountered it with a lot of HR teams when we were talking about doing this. They were directly going into the mindset, but then we have to do this for the global organization. Right? I'm like, no, you don't. Where's that written? Show me that law. That's absolutely not true, right? And sometimes I work with organizations that are operating in more than 100 countries, and when they talk about one site, right? So one factory, then that single factory already has like 12,000 employees. That's already a proper company on its own. I said, well, why can't we just do it for this site, for this in this country, the only location that you have? Let's start there, learn and try, and then roll it out. But I think it's also up to us a little bit to show HR that this can be done in a phased rollout and in a phased approach. So that's important. I did see a nice question in the chat. So
I see. There goes my lack of multitasking.
I was a little bit dragging off to the side here. What are we hard communicators, or for being on the neurodiversity spectrum? How to avoid discrimination? Yeah, is there a silver bullet? No, absolutely not, right? Because where humans are involved in a process, bias creeps in, period, right? The thing is, how can you get as close to a situation that you are as inclusive as possible for as many as different types of people, humans, if you will. So people who are on the neurodiversity spectrum, that specific one, I think they will definitely benefit from skills and competency-based hiring, because it's around what they can actually do, what the tools are that are in their toolbox. Because if you have classic resume, what have you done and what have you achieved type of interviews, it's more like a loose conversation, almost like we're just having now. It's conversational, and this is where for people that are neurodiverse, it can definitely break down for them, or they are so structured and focused in their story that they can come across a certain way, then people actually take decisions based on that, right? So if you do skills and competency-based hiring, and we literally just talk about project management, we have defined what we need for project management or problem solving, we have sample questions, or maybe even an assessment that we've learned that actually shows us the capability of this person for this specific skill, right? So you even the playing field a little bit more, but is it a perfect solution? No, right? So specifically with people who are on the spectrum, there the most important thing is training and awareness, right? Because a lot of people don't always dare to talk about it, but at the end of the day, if a person on the spectrum has a meeting or an interview with the hiring manager also takes that decision, the hiring decision. I work with this person and see this person more than my own wife, on a weekly basis, right? So that creeps in there. And I think the only way to actually talk about that and train people is that we are allowed to talk about that, right? Because if we deny that those things actually impact the decision of a hiring manager, how are we going to actually help them and improve it, right? Yeah. So some people find it sensitive, like, what are you saying? Like, do you actually say that hiring managers actually take decisions based on that somebody's on the spectrum and say no? I said, yes, that happens every flipping day, everywhere on the planet. And we need to be able to talk about those things. And if we are not able to talk about those things, we can't fix it. No. Right. So I like that question. Sorry, small sidetrack there. Thank you.
And maybe one thing to add there, because we have had a lot of discussion internally around neurodiversity, because what you often see, of course, when it comes to measuring competencies, one way of doing it is by using an assessment. You could also do it in interviews. I think every tool has an advantage or a disadvantage for a certain group. But what you see a lot with assessments out there, we don't do it in our assessment, is that they normalize the norm groups based on, for example, if you indicate I have autism, that you go into a different norm group and that your score is normalized for given your condition. I think that's a very dangerous thing to do, because on average, of course, this doesn't apply to everyone who's on the autism spectrum or everyone with ADHD or whatever, but in general, research has shown that, for example, someone with autism is better in analytical thinking, might have a little bit more difficulties with communicating, whereas someone with, for example, ADHD might have a much more creative brain. So I think by normalizing those kinds of scores, the result will be that everyone has sort of the same competencies based on those results. But we should actually celebrate the fact that there are differences. And that could indeed mean that maybe in general, people with autism, if they have more difficulties with communicating, might also be more suitable for roles where communicating is not the most important competency in that role, but do have a lot of competencies that are very important for different types of roles within the organization. And you also don't want to balance out their highs, let's say. So I think that's always good to keep in mind.
That's the consequence. You actually tone down or push down a little bit of the exceptional things that people have on the spectrum, because we want to make sure that we actually level the things that go below average. But you can't. I haven't seen it. Maybe I'm happy to be proven wrong, but you can't do that in a proper way. Just taking out those and then not affecting the great things about those types of brains, if you will, right? So no, I think I fully agree with you there. Because also, if we cannot, again, we need to talk about that. If somebody needs some support or a little bit different type of consideration than what is accepted as the norm in type of communication or asking somebody to do something, etc., we need to be able to talk about that, because then we can organize ourselves around it. And that always, in my eyes, is met with a lot of resistance, and people like, but then it's completely different, and how I need to engage with this person. I've seen it a million times, and I've worked with different people for different reasons on the spectrum. It's nuanced differences. It is more usually what I see in my personal experience about me, that somebody does not respond in the way that someone else would respond, or that I would expect them to respond. And it's just me knowing that. I continue with my day, and in that conversation, and nothing is going on. It's very small. We always make it feel that it is this big thing and I have to walk on eggshells around one person. No, but we need to be able to talk about it. So I like that. Don't normalize it. Please don't do that. No.
I did see a couple of other questions in the chat. I'm going to answer them in a bit because I saw that there's one for me, but I'm going to do it at the end. Maxime, if that's okay for you. I wanted to talk about two topics still. We have 50 minutes, so 7.5 minutes per topic then. Two things, technology and where to get started. And I think technology also ties into to the question, Maria, that you asked. So we will also answer your question there. So let's say I am an enterprise company, whatever, and I have a product team with product owners, UX designers, etc. And I come to you and say, hey, Tony, I want to move from experience-based hiring to competency-based hiring. Where to start? What would your answer be?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, it is. The main thing for me is think big, start small, right? Because the starting point for every individual organization is completely different, right? Even if you all just hire on resumes, right? You have a different influence in organization. You have a different relationship with HR. There is a different eagerness for change and to try things in a different way, right? So even organizations that may look on the outside the same, completely different dynamics, right? So think big, start small. I would define the vision, the North Star. What would you like to achieve, right? So we would like to be able to take proper hiring decisions that are not based on gut feeling, right? That are based on the things that actually impact somebody's success in the role. And roughly, if that is a North Star, you can define it a little bit more if you want to. What do you actually need to do to get there, right? So I always work backwards, right? So some organizations then they directly say, okay, then we're gonna implement scorecards, we're gonna implement an assessment, right? So they start from today and directly take a step. I would definitely not advise that. Define that North Star first, like this is what we want to achieve, because alignment between everyone who needs to be involved in this is key. Else it's not going to happen. It's going to stagnate for whatever reason. I can promise you that. You will start very eagerly, and in a year said, how far are you? Like, yeah, not so far. Other priorities were a little bit busy. So that definition of the North Star, where you all want to go to, is super important. And then build a rough plan, right? So what are the big building blocks to get there? And you don't need to build an entire project plan. Okay, then you can start, okay, what do we want to do first? What is the first step that gets us closer to that end goal? And every time you want to take a new step, it's the same discussion. What is a step that can take us closer to that end goal? Because if the sentence is always built like this, you at least know that whatever you do and every step that you take and everything that you do gets you closer to that specific end goal. So this is why it is important to define that. And where to start? Very small. The two main things that I definitely think can impact for everyone who's here today, which costs no money. You don't need budget or complex big projects for that. That is your recruiters, talk to your recruiters or yourself, show up differently. Stop accepting a job when you get it and directly post it online. Always, without any exception, talk to the hiring manager. Even if it's for 3 or 5 minutes, you need to start doing that, because if you don't do that, it becomes you have to start anyway one moment, because at the end of the day you want to move towards this job intake meeting, talk about what competencies and skills are left and what you want in the team, etc. Right? That's where you want to go. But that literally starts, call up your hiring manager. Hey, we've hired this role for 6 times this year. Are we still looking for the same type of person? What was actually from the last 6 that we hired, which one was the best one and why? Even if it's this small and simple, don't overcomplicate it. You are showing interest in your hiring manager. You're showing interest in, hey, I really want to do a good job for you. That's where it starts. It costs no money, and it will impact your life tremendously in the relationships and the communication that you'll have with hiring managers. The second thing will not cost you money. It is influencing the interview team. So not just the hiring manager, everyone who actually speaks to a candidate, is by introducing a basic form of scorecards if you do not have that already. Also, don't overcomplicate it like, crap, what do we put on the scorecards and we need mapping? No, put these 2 scorecards on all your jobs. I don't care if you're hiring for a CEO or an intern. Functional fit, cultural fit. Because what happens in the brain of everyone who interviews, now they said, I had a good conversation with Charlotte. She is great. I liked her, hire her. Now they have to give feedback in, okay, interesting, but why do you think she's a good functional fit? And why do you think she's a good fit for the organization? This is already for a lot of interviewers, it's short circuit, like, oh, I don't know, or actually talked about that, or actually asked the right questions for that. This is already a start, and it will not go perfect, and most hiring managers will not fill it out, but you keep trying and you keep repeating and you keep doing it. Like, this is the new way forward. This small change forces your interviewers in a kind way to already structure their feedback and their answers in a why, instead of I just like the person. So those two, always talk to your hiring managers on job intake. Even if you already know exactly what you're looking for, reconfirm that and start with these two scorecards. This will already be enough change and you can work on this for 6 months to start to optimize and perfect this and see if you can get that ball rolling, that people are actually interested in. What are you doing? And it leads to better conversations. Can we do more of this, right? This is what you hope to achieve.
Yeah,
this is what I would suggest.
Hey, but that makes that if you do that, go to a hiring manager, and then we would make the assumption maybe that a hiring manager is always very aware of the competencies that you would need for a specific role. I think there's also a huge gap in the perception of. So what I see a lot with customers is that if we start working with them, they present me with like all kinds of documents with these are the competencies that we need for an engineer or for a product owner or for a marketer or whatever. And then when we are actually going to assess that team ourselves to see, okay, what does our data say about their competencies? It's usually something completely different. So how can you overcome the fact that the perception of the hiring manager is going to make you look for the wrong competencies in the first place?
Yes, that's literally like you do it, test it and assess it, but not everyone is in the position to directly do that. I get that. If you don't talk to your hiring managers about the skills and the competencies or about the role that you're looking for, then it becomes very hard to start that conversation. So this comes again back, we have a job description, and literally ask your hiring manager what they think they need. And if they actually say what they need, then you're going to push people down the process that you think have those skills and competencies. And what will happen, and I've experienced this as well, I introduced 5 candidates that are spot on based on those skills and competencies. I already kind of knew the hiring manager was going to reject it, but I just let it happen, because then you actually have a conversation based on actual more facts instead of gut feeling. Like, hey, you say that you look for this, look at the resume. I did a pre-screening with the candidate here and here and here. They actually have exactly what you asked for. You still reject it, right? So it's naturally forcing that conversation. So again, also, it's don't go for perfection and everything needs to be right at the same time. Let it sometimes also go a little bit wrong, so you actually have a foundation to have that conversation. And now the conversation is based on what we said we're looking for, so data and stuff that's literally on the table between us versus your opinion and my opinion.
Yeah.
That's how I would begin with that, right? Because those gaps are always there. A lot of organizations that build these skills and competencies, there's not a real scientific thing behind it. A lot of organizations work with and at. There was, to be honest, not a real scientific approach to how those skills and competency list per role actually came to fruition. They were just based it on it. Like, an email marketer needs to have project management skills and these kind of things, right? And it's all fine. I'm not judging it, but that means that there is a gap between if you do an analysis and what the reality of today is, if you will. So, and you do that too, I guess. What I just realized, what I just said, you do the analysis, what happens? It's a difference. You talk about the difference and not your opinion about my opinion before you do the analysis. So you create a situation where you can actually talk about something that is not you versus me.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Maria was asking the question. Sorry, Maria, for keeping you waiting for a while. What kind of dynamics would you use to assess competencies in a successful way? Behavioral questions, assessments, or is there something else you believe is key in identifying competencies?
I personally do not have a strong opinion. Like, these types of companies always have to go through an assessment or always have to go through a human interviewing or a combination of both. I know that's not an answer that you want, so I say my answer is it depends, right? It's I usually approach not so much about how you assess the competencies, but it's more around the hiring process that you build. So my question here would be, if you take a hiring decision, everything we do is just to feed the hiring decision, to lead up to the hiring decision. So my question would be, okay, based on what do you actually take the hiring decision? Have you defined that? What is the key indicators for success in the role? And do we have that information when we actually take the hiring decision? Once we agree on that, so with the business, HR, you, whatever that is, then the question is, how do we design our hiring process actually in such a way that we collect that data? And some points we can ask in the beginning, like some screening questions, knockout questions. If I'm looking for drivers, yes, I can ask a knockout question, or somebody has a driver's license, the correct driver's license, right? We're not going to waste our time on that. Yes, no, okay, bye. If we don't have educational purposes for people who can get their driver's license, but okay, you catch my drift. And then after that, you design your hiring process. Is that an assessment first, and then you talk about the results of the assessment, or you actually do 1 or 2 interviews based on those competencies and then do an assessment as a final interview? There is no right or wrong answer, but the approach is always the same in how I design these things. It always starts with the hiring decision. Who is in there? And based on what do we want to take a hiring decision? And then we design our process also there backwards, if you will, in gathering that data.
Yeah.
So the actual competencies, because I can't say screening questions, an assessment, or interview. 9 out of 10 times, you can have a combination of the 3, or you can technically solve it, maybe not ideal, just by interviewing, just by assessment, or just by a combination of the thing. That is usually not the problem. The problem is this the right way for us as a company, right? If we actually want a white glove and the experience in the interview is very important, then there is more human touch. If it's just let's go and we need to hire 1,000 people with 1 recruiter a quarter, yeah, we're probably going to do everything through assessments, take the decision, automate, not so much human contact, right? So that's how I would approach it. Hope that helps, Maria.
Hey, we have 4 minutes left. So by the way, for everyone who's still listening, if you do have any questions, now is the time to ask. I had one last one for you, Tony, which is, well, we spoke about it, of course, before. I think the resume is, for me, it has been dead for a long time, but I think everyone is realizing that it's slowly fading away. You work at SmartRecruiters. Recruitment teams are getting more and more tech savvy, so we tend to buy more tool stacks to optimize our process. I think an applicant tracking system is a very good example of a system that is by default designed for resume-based hiring. It's literally the starting point. You apply on a career site and you do that with a resume and a motivation letter. How is SmartRecruiters going to make that transition? Because eventually every business might want to shift towards competency-based hiring, but if their tool stack is going to make it practically super difficult and a lot of manual work to do so, then we're only going to make our lives harder. So what is the plan for SmartRecruiters for this transition?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a very good question, and every platform that does something in recruitment over the last couple of decades is built around the resume, right? We can bullshit about it, but that's just the case, right? It all starts with the resume. The resume is the main point of data in that entire process. But for us, yes, of course, we're also changing that. We have customers, and I've done cases in Eastern Europe where we set up hiring processes for people without resumes. I've even set up hiring processes have helped organizations set up hiring processes in South Africa without people that don't have access to internet. We still do it through SmartRecruiters. We can talk about that for hours, but it's technically possible. But eradicating that resume, and I think you hit the nail on the head by calling us an ATS, because that is where the mindset shift needs to happen, right? On average, our enterprise customers have at least 15 pieces of technology integrated with our ATS, right? So we're actually not an applicant tracking system per se. We're a hiring platform. And as a hiring platform, we that directly changes the mindset on what you are and what you need to be for your customers, right? So one of the key belief cornerstones of us that we have as belief system is that we say we want hiring teams to be able to hire without boundaries. We should not be the limit. is still a big piece of our core still around that resume? Yes, sure, right? But we're in the middle of this transition as everyone else is, right? But the hiring without boundaries is the philosophy that we try to follow, meaning we're no longer just an applicant tracking system. We are a hiring platform, and we need to be able to form around the needs of our customers and design custom hiring processes, right? They can still have a CV, resumes based hiring in one country or for one type of office, and then other recruiters in another team, literally one desk over, do everything through assessments and in a way more digital way. So that's where we are moving towards. Interesting times.
Absolutely. It's and I think you're doing a great job in that, by the way. Hey, it's 45. That means it's the end of this webinar. Floor, I did see your question still regarding, can you give examples of how to make the recruitment process more inclusive for neurodiverse people? If you go to our website and then webinars, we have a lot of webinars very much focused on purely neurodiversity and recruitment. So I think it's better to check out those, because we are not going to be able, I think, to give you an in-depth answer for now. Thanks so much, Tony, for joining today. I think we will probably go for a follow-up in a couple of months' time, because this is going so fast, these developments. So I'm very curious to see where we are standing in 6 months' time. If you do have any questions still for Tony, then I know that Tony is very active on LinkedIn. Feel free to add him. If you have any questions for us, then you also know where to find us, of course. And thanks so much for being in this webinar today. And thanks so much again, Tony, for joining.
Thank you for having me. Thank you all.
Ciao.